I was brought up right next to a live railway line which was at the bottom of the garden. My father always liked the Great Western, so we visited the Dart Valley. I remember visiting in 1973 when I was but a very small boy. My mother took me on the train and my father took our post-war Alvis to the next station because that's all we could afford. But the engine was this big, lovely, smoky steam engine called the Flying Scotsman. That was it. I fell in love. My grandma bought me this rug, and friends still buy me ephemera from small to large items. But from that day as a toddler, my love for the LNER grew. Everything I owned was revolving around having a Flying Scotsman. I even painted my Clockwork 040 into LNER livery, hand painting on the side, complete with the red background lettering. It was my grandma who'd given me the rug, who left me £5 in her posthumous birthday card to me, that enabled me to put additional birthday money towards the £7 purchase price. And I found an old Small Heath model shop, long since gone, able to sell me an older style Hornby brand new Flying Scotsman. And so it was bought. This box, as you can see, is quite heavily worn, is well travelled, but it's still complete, even if a little bit battered, and contains that very same Flying Scotsman. Let's get it out the box. This was my childhood dream. This one is completely unmodified and much loved and much used. It's probably travelled thousands of hours round my layout as a youth. It's been crashed, it's been bashed, it's had big trains pulled behind, it's been raced, it's been taken to school and enjoyed on the layouts all over the place. Gradually, as my understanding of the LNER increased and I started building other locomotives and buying other locomotives that were available, I realised that the dome wasn't quite right, the valve gear was quite basic, the buffers weren't painted correctly, and the superheater headers were incorrect for the period that I wanted to model. Eventually, I even learnt that the tender was as preserved and really didn't fit the 1937 period I was trying to model. The numbers on the side even wore off, and although these are freight lettering, that was all I had at the time. You'll notice this still sports its original valve gear and original cylinders, but it was a slightly later model with the flanged centre wheel, even though it runs off an X04 motor. A friend of mine getting out of modelling at school sold me his own Flying Scotsman, and the chassis of which was used to make this green A4. The body was bought from East Kent Models with a cheque written by my mum, and the tender and the chassis was reused, but this gave me a spare body shell. A little bit of pre-internet research led me to believe that 2500, called Windsor Lad, was actually built very similar to the Hornby body shell, and so this spare body shell was renamed. This is the actual body shell, much modified by recent modifications, but it spent many years fitted to my original A3 chassis. But eventually I wanted Flying Scotsman back. You'll notice that the valve gear on here is unaltered. Valve gear on this one is very much different. This uses Hornby A4 valve gear and replacement A3 cylinders. It's also got a replacement centre wheel. This original Flying Scotsman still has all its plastic handrails moulded into the side of the locomotive, and although I've removed the superheater headers on this one in an attempt to make it more like an A1, this was rectified on my later models with separate handrails put onto the body shell and even onto the cab and the tender sides. It makes a massive difference to the quality of the model. Similarly, the buffer beam, instead of just having the blob of the coupling hook and the buffer shanks just painted red, I've painted the buffer shanks black on this model, but on this updated model there is a proper buffer hook, and of course the buffers are painted black around their shanks. Other improvements include the cast smoke box build plate and the application of lining to the lower cylinders, as well as the lining around the cab windows and around the side of the tender. All of these omitted from Hornby's model originally. Similarly, the way I've treated the mounting of the nameplate with the big plastic background on the original moulding, I couldn't always completely remove, but I've made efforts to slim it down and certainly replace it with etch plates on this one. But on the other A1 bodies, the plates have been removed and just glued the etch plates directly in place. So my original childhood's grandma's Flying Scotsman now lives in a box. Still comes out to play on a regular basis, but on the understanding that it's strictly speaking not correct, and could almost run with my BR preserved 1960s eras. My Windsor Lad was reunited with a new chassis in a more modern period, still an XO4 motored one, and runs nicely, but it joins the fleet. All of my A3s and A1s have been repainted, relettered, lined. They've had new handrails. They've had a lot of child type plastic details removed. Most have had new cylinders and valve gear and centre wheels replaced, so we're not running on flange wheels. And except for the Chinese motored ones, all still use XO4 motors because I like them and they run well. I don't pretend that any of my locomotives are fine scale, highly detailed models, but they look the part and they serve me very well. So here's a breakdown of the ones I built. All made from Triang A3s or Hornby A1s, much modified and repainted. 2500 was a Doncaster-born A3 that did actually match the Triang body remarkably well, and so the body was renumbered. The chassis was bought to go into a green A4 that I was building at the time, and that's where the chassis still is. But fast forward about 25 years and I bought a replacement chassis and tender to complete my original desire of having a proper A3. The number stayed, as did the name, Windsor Lad, because at the time I was at college at Brunel, not far from Windsor. So this has been fully repainted and lined, but is essentially the A3 Triang body. The tender is the correct tender, but notice no corridor connection, which is correct for this locomotive. So that's my second one. I was in the process of building some A4s when I came across an eBay lot for a nondescript collection of A3s. In actual fact, all three were purchased for around £35. Some didn't have tenders, but I had some spare. Two were old Triang ones with flangeless centre wheels, these two chassis, which were already rapidly going through the workshop of being updated with flanged wheels, courtesies of Peter's Spares, and some A4 valve gear grafted into the unit to make them more updated. I like that look. And the third one was actually a Chinese-made engine-driven locomotive, which turned out to need a 10-pound motor to replace the broken motor. And so the idea of building these three was born. All have slightly different tenders. I've not finished putting the coal in this one. And this one has no corridor connection. And this one's another GN type. So the search was on to get some prototypes. The first one chosen was Dick Turpin, mainly because I could get the nameplates and also because my childhood dog was called Turpin. 2579 is a North British built A1. It's been completely repainted, as they all have, and lined with press fix transfers and lining sheets, and it sports a Great Northern type coal rail type tender. The second was a 1924 built Diamond Jubilee, and again sports a non-corridor type A4 type tender. The GNR built most of their locomotives right-hand drive, with the reversing rod clearly visible under the footplate. This continued with Diamond Jubilee and with Dick Turpin. But the later A3s were built left-hand drive, and that's visible with the rod on the side here. The original A1s were rebuilt to A3 specification with their banjo domes and larger boilers even in the 30s, but they weren't converted to left-hand drive like the Flying Scotsman was until the 1950s. The last variant was the Chinese-built A3 type chassis unit, a much more modern unit with a nicer body all round. This actually sports an A4 tender frame with sprung buffers. I had to buy that to match the Chinese made chassis, and the body is actually a Gordon GN type tender that again is lettered and lined with press fix transfers. I always liked Humorous because it was the one that was used for experimental work. Mine is modelled immediately before the little smoke deflectors were applied either side of the chimney. The deflectors were not fitted until the 2nd of 38, so it is very much in the condition for my period that is modelled. And the double chimney I had actually acquired 25 years previously in preparation for building a Humorous, and when I took the chimney off the Chinese built one, the double chimney seen here actually is designed to glue into the single chimney hole, and all I had to do was drill the second hole out so that both holes are open to the air. Building Humorous, because it's a round domed A1 built in 1929 but actually built to A3 specification, and as such was built left-hand drive. This meant that the Hornby body shell had to be modified not only to move the forward and reverse gear, but also the feed pipe that goes into the smoke box had to be removed from the opposite side and replicated on this side. And because it was an A3, not an A1, I had to replicate the superheater headers, which are the main noticeable differences between the A1s and the A3s. So Humorous, in addition to the double chimney, is actually remarkably different, but still based on a Hornby A1 body shell. My final A1 is actually another Flying Scotsman, and is also one of my oldest builds. I started this in the mid-1990s. I acquired a Jameson V2 kit, body and chassis, and it came with an A3 kit as well, and this is the A3 kit which I made up. At the time I bought one of the very new Hornby A1 bodies as a spare part and made it fit. So this body is mid-90s repainted and relettered and relined Hornby body. It's got the same cast plates, but the valve gear is the scratch built version from the kit, and the wheels are actually Romfords. The motor is a little Japanese can motor I bought at the time, but I changed the rear bogie arrangement to a Hornby A4 type and bought an A4 Hornby chassis for the tender, and the body was another GN tender I bought complete with the ladder. I had the foresight to buy the ladder, whereas the other two tenders I had to scratch build. But at the time I got these as spare parts. I've not quite finished putting coal loads in these, but I have cut the coal loads out ready so that I can get a more realistic feel, because of course these were originally huge to allow for tender drives. I do like even the way the basic 70s kits has got the little, I suppose they're actual splash guards on the front bogie frame. And of course there's a lovely screw coupling that I rescued from something else. The buffers are sprung. The valve gear is incredibly delicate and was extremely difficult to solder up, but even has working inlet valves. So this engine sat in the shed for nearly 20 years, but the valve gear I was always very proud of, and was so pleased now it runs beautifully, complete with flywheel. I'm quite proud of the fact that I now have 6 LNER Gresley Pacifics, which have probably cost me no more than about £200 in total. All of them run really well, all of them pull trains, all of them look quite decent, certainly from normal viewing distances, even if I've had to spend many hours getting them to this state. There's representatives from every builder. There's right-hand and left-hand drives. There's the experimental ones. There's banjo domed and round domes, and every single different type of tender is represented, and they're all as correct as I can make them for the period that I model. Some of them have got screw link couplings fitted at the front. However, my childhood one is unmodified, although I have painted the buffer shanks black. Little details like the etched plates, the changes to the valve gear, and the little oval cast plate, which is another etching, transforms the front end of the locomotive, as well as the way that the satin coat on the finish of the paintwork enhances the look of these handsome engines. So I hope you like my review of my A1 stock, running from my childhood's toy train right through to the not rivet counting accurate but much more realistic style of locomotives that I've got now. There's a total of 5 A1s and A3s to choose from, a representative from every works that built them. Most of them are right-hand drive, but there is one left-hand drive in amongst them, and every single tender type is represented. I don't actually think I've spent much over £200 creating all of them, although I've spent many, many more hours. I do hope you've enjoyed my LNER Flying Scotsman A1 classes. They certainly show off Gresley's perfection to my eyes. Do like and subscribe, and join me next time.